The champagne hadn't even been opened before the tension in the air turned sharp. I'd only been at my sister Caroline's wedding for 15 minutes, and already my parents looked at me like my presence alone was an embarrassment. I stood quietly in a corner of the reception hall, wearing a simple dress I'd bought with my own money, watching my mother adjust Caroline's gown while whispering bitterly to my father behind a rehearsed smile. I already knew what they were murmuring about: my refusal. 2 weeks earlier, they'd summoned me for a conversation with the gravity of a medical emergency. But it wasn't about illness. It was about money. They wanted me to sell my car, the car I had spent years saving for, just so Caroline's extravagant wedding could have an extra layer of luxury. My dad insisted, she deserves the perfect day. My mother added coldly, you'll never be a bride, so at least support the one who will. There was no attempt to soften the blow in her words. I said no. Not to be difficult, but because that car symbolized the only real freedom I had left. After a lifetime of being dismissed, overlooked, and treated like a placeholder in Caroline's shadow, that vehicle was my one assertion of self-worth. I bought it. I maintained it. I earned it. And I wasn't about to give it up so my sister could have gold-plated centerpieces or a second designer gown for her dramatic entrance. That choice branded me as the villain of the family. The night before the wedding, I overheard Caroline joking with her bridesmaids that I was a jealous, broke loser who couldn't stand to see her shine. My mother called me selfish. My father reminded me, you owe us everything. That's when the truth settled in my chest like stone. I didn't owe them a thing. I had always been the one to give something up. I skipped college to work in the family's business. I gave up trips so Caroline could travel Europe. While she basked in applause, I stayed in the background. And now they wanted the one thing that was mine, my car, my last thread of independence, so she could have a picture-perfect day. I showed up at the wedding knowing I wasn't welcome. My name was missing from the seating chart. They handed me a plastic chair near the kitchen entrance. Guests barely looked at me. My aunt offered a strained smile and muttered, "At least you're here." When the music started and the bride descended the grand staircase in a custom gown adorned with hand-sewn pearls, something inside me didn't burn, it cleared. It wasn't anger or jealousy. It was realization. The speeches were salt in the wound. My father toasted our generous Caroline, who always puts others first. My mother tearfully declared that family is built on sacrifice. Applause echoed around me. I didn't join in. And then came the final blow. During the family photo session, I was asked to step aside. "Just immediate family," the photographer said gently. I turned to my mother. Her expression didn't even twitch. I looked to my father. He motioned toward the buffet like I should just disappear. I stood there frozen, humiliated, until Caroline walked past and muttered with a smirk, "Maybe if you'd sold that stupid car, you'd be in the photo." And that was it. Something deep inside me, something buried under years of silence and self-denial, snapped. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I simply turned around, walked the several blocks back to where I'd parked, since I hadn't been granted valet, and drove away with a strange, quiet satisfaction curling in my chest. I knew exactly what I was going to do. Sleep didn't come that night. I sat awake, city lights flickering beyond my window, every insult and snub from the day boiling under my skin. They had tried to strip me of dignity in public, reduce me to a servant at my own sister's wedding, and take the only asset I had earned with my own hands. But what they didn't know was that I had been building something in the shadows. While they were busy dismissing me as just the girl with a car, I had turned that car into income. I'd been driving for ride shares, delivering goods, running courier jobs. And with that steady stream of earnings, I started investing. 2 years ago, I flipped my first antique. Then another. I joined niche auctions online. I started collecting, reselling heirlooms, some rare, some forgotten, objects antique dealers and collectors couldn't resist. I never told my family. I knew they'd try to leech off my progress the moment they caught wind. But here's the twist, they had no idea what I'd bought a few months ago. I had legally acquired the deed to a modest storage facility just outside town, an unassuming place that happened, by pure luck, to house my parents' most prized possessions. Furniture passed down for generations. Rare porcelain. Family heirlooms they stored there for cheap rent and safety. What they didn't realize was the previous owner had defaulted, and the property was quietly listed in a silent auction. I was the silent bidder. And the winning one. 4 months, I paid the property fees and didn't touch a thing. But after the wedding, the very next morning, I drove straight to that storage unit and unlocked the door to what now legally belonged to me. The first item I reached for was a solid oak jewelry chest, my mother's pride and joy. Inside were vintage brooches, an old wedding hair comb she once said should only belong to real brides, and a silver locket she refused to let me wear to prom because, in her words, I hadn't earned it. One by one, I catalogued every piece. Photographed. Appraised. Listed for sale. By noon, their entire legacy was already in motion. The rarest items? Sold to collectors in Italy and Spain. The rare writing desk my father once boasted about? Sold. The embroidered armchair no one was ever allowed to sit on? Gone within 3 hours. And for a touch of poetic justice, I sold the sterling silver cutlery they wouldn't let me use during holiday meals, and used the proceeds to treat myself to a private dinner at the city's finest rooftop restaurant. 2 days later, my phone buzzed. It was my mother. I let the call go to voicemail. Her voice was shaking. The storage unit. It's empty. Were we robbed? The police say there was no break-in. What's going on? Call me back. I didn't. Instead, I texted them a screenshot of the official deed transfer, with my name clearly printed at the top. Below it, I added one line. Consider this repayment, for the car, for my dignity, and for your cruelty. That evening, I blocked their numbers. But it didn't end there. They tried guilt first. Messages from extended relatives rolled in. My aunt accused me of dishonoring the family's legacy. My cousin called me vindictive and heartless. And finally, after days of silence, my father sent me a single, emotionless email. You crossed a line. You are no longer part of this family. But the truth was, they had drawn that line years ago, long before I ever took a stand. While they mourned their antique furniture, I was busy making moves. A local historian had heard whispers about my collection and reached out with an unexpected offer. To collaborate on a public exhibit using the heirlooms I now owned, not for revenge, but to tell a story that had never been told. I called it The Forgotten Daughter, Stories That Never Reached the Mantle. The exhibit opened on a gray Saturday afternoon. I didn't expect much. Maybe a handful of curious locals or the odd antique enthusiast. But by nightfall, the gallery was full. People moved slowly through the space, stopping at every item, reading the carefully written cards beneath each piece. They weren't just antiques anymore. They were chapters of a hidden life. Beneath the silver locket my mother never let me wear, the plaque read. Worn by no one, because some daughters are never seen as deserving, no matter how well they behave. Underneath the armchair my parents guarded like treasure, reserved for the important, until the forgotten one took her place. Visitors stared. Some teared up. A few cried openly. A local reporter asked if I'd be willing to share more. I said yes, but not to air dirty laundry. I just told the truth. That I was the daughter who kept quiet too long. That being excluded didn't destroy me, it pushed me to create something of my own. The interview went viral across town. I didn't send the article to my parents. I didn't need to. They saw it. A week later, my father came to the gallery, alone. I was at the far end, adjusting the lights on a display. When we made eye contact, I stood still. He walked slowly through the room, taking in each object he had once guarded so fiercely. He paused at the old silver candlesticks. Then, finally, he turned to me. His voice cracked as he said, "You've made your point." I looked at him calmly and replied, "This wasn't about making a point. This was about telling the story you never let me speak." He opened his mouth like he might say something more. But the apology never came. Just silence. And I no longer needed anything from that silence. I turned back to the display. That night, I walked home feeling something I hadn't felt in years. Not victory, not vindication, freedom. For so long, I had believed I needed my parents' approval to feel whole. But I finally understood. The validation I was chasing had never been theirs to give. It had always been mine to claim. Weeks passed. The exhibit was extended twice due to demand. Letters arrived from strangers. One woman wrote, "Thank you for showing me I'm not the only daughter left out of family photographs." Another handwritten note simply said, "They tried to erase you, but instead, you carved your name into history." I framed that letter and hung it above my desk, right beside the first royalty check I received from the exhibit. It was worth more than anything my parents had ever given me, more than they ever believed I could earn. And it was made out to me. My name. The one they tried to leave behind. The one now etched into every wall of that gallery.